The school building always looked the same every morning, but that day it felt different to her. The hallways were noisy as usual, lockers slamming, students rushing past each other, teachers calling out reminders about exams and forgotten assignments. But she walked slowly, holding her music folder close to her chest like it carried something far heavier than paper. She had a feeling the day was going to bring something she was not prepared for. She wasn't the loud type, nor the one who tried to impress anyone. Most days she sat quietly in class, finishing her work and slipping out without drawing attention. But the piano room was where she felt most alive. The smell of polished wood, the feel of the cold keys under her fingers, the soft echo of her notes filling the small room. It was the only place where she felt like she could breathe freely. She was not the best in her class, at least not in the way people measured skill. She didn't play fast pieces to show off. She didn't compete to be the center of attention, and she didn't try to charm the teachers. She simply played because it made her feel something she could not explain. When she entered the music room that day, the other students were already chatting excitedly. Some stood around the piano. Some stretched their fingers dramatically like they were warming up before a competition. And others scrolled on their phones pretending not to care. She quietly took her seat near the back. The teachers were discussing something near their desk, looking over a stack of sheet music. She didn't think much of it at first, until she noticed one of them glance toward her and then quickly look away. Her heart started beating a little faster. Usually the teachers gave assignments based on skill level. The advanced students received challenging pieces, full of fast runs and complicated hand switches. The rest of the class got simpler ones, nice pieces but nothing too overwhelming. She belonged somewhere in the middle. She was steady, reliable, and always practiced. But she wasn't considered one of the stars. That spot was reserved for students who loved being the center of attention. "All right, everyone, settle down," one of the teachers announced. The class slowly quieted. She placed her folder on her lap and waited. "We've decided to give each of you a new assignment. This one will lead into your performance for the winter recital. We want to see how much each of you can grow from now until then." Her stomach tightened. She liked recitals, but they always made her nervous. Performing in front of a crowd gave her shaky hands, and she hated the feeling of everyone staring at her. The teachers started calling names and handing out sheets. Every time a student received theirs, the others would lean over, curious to see what piece they got. Some groaned, others smiled proudly. She watched quietly as the stack of sheet music became smaller and smaller. When her name was finally called, she stood and slowly walked to the front. The teacher handed her a sheet with a small, almost unreadable smile. But there was something in the teacher's eyes, something that made her unsure if this was a good moment or a very bad one. She took the paper and returned to her seat, trying not to draw attention. But attention found her anyway. A few students leaned forward to glance at her new assignment, and their reactions came quickly. "Seriously?" One whispered, not to her, but loud enough for others to hear. "That piece." Another muttered, sounding half shocked, half amused. She looked down at the page. Her hands began to tremble. It was the hardest piece in the syllabus. Not just difficult, legendary. The kind everyone in class talked about, but no one wanted to play because it demanded everything. Fast jumps, fast scales, emotional depth, control, strength, and endurance. It was the kind of piece teachers usually save for students who were already close to mastering advanced techniques. Why would they give this to her? Her breathing slowed. For a moment she thought maybe they had made a mistake. Maybe they confused her name with someone else's. She didn't feel ready for something like this. She had never played a piece this challenging. She looked up at the teachers, hoping for a hint or reassurance. But they were already moving on with the rest of the assignments. When the final student received their sheet, one of the teachers finally addressed the room again. "We gave each of you pieces that we believe will push you forward," the teacher said. "Some assignments may feel very difficult, but we chose them because we believe you can rise to the challenge." She felt her chest tighten even more. Was this supposed to be encouragement? Because all she felt was fear. When the class was dismissed, the room erupted into chatter again. Students packed their things, compared their music sheets, and laughed about how tough the upcoming weeks would be. She stayed seated for a moment, staring at the notes on the page. Her mind kept racing. What if she failed? What if she couldn't learn it in time? What if she froze during the recital? What if her teachers regretted giving her something this difficult? She heard footsteps approach. One of the teachers stopped beside her. "I know it looks impossible," the teacher said softly, "but try not to judge it yet. Start slow. Give it a chance. You might surprise yourself." The teacher smiled, but it wasn't a warm smile. It was the kind of smile adults use when they want to sound supportive but aren't completely sure. She nodded, though she didn't fully understand how she was supposed to take that. As she walked out of the classroom, she clutched the sheet tightly. Her mind felt heavy, and her steps were slow. The hallways that were loud earlier now felt strangely quiet, as though her senses were focused only on the piece in her hands. She sat on a bench outside for a few moments. The weather was cool, the kind of morning that made people wrap their arms around themselves. She didn't mind the cold. It helped clear her thoughts. She knew she couldn't avoid it. She had to start practicing eventually. She wasn't someone who gave up easily, even when things scared her. Something deep inside her told her that maybe this assignment came for a reason. Maybe the teachers wanted to see if she could do more than what she usually showed, but that didn't stop the fear. When she got home later that day, she placed the sheet on the piano stand and sat down slowly. The keys looked the same as always, but the piece staring back at her felt like a mountain she wasn't sure she could climb. She played the first few measures. Her fingers stumbled. The rhythm felt wrong. The jumps were too wide for her hands to keep up. Within a few minutes, she stopped and sighed. It was too hard. She placed her hands on her lap and looked down, feeling the weight of disappointment settle on her shoulders. The room felt quiet, almost too quiet. She wondered if the teachers had overestimated her, or maybe they saw something in her she didn't see in herself. After sitting there for a while, she took a deep breath and placed her hands back on the keys. She tried again. She made mistakes. She hesitated. She struggled, but she didn't stop. She practiced until her fingers grew tired. Her back started to ache. It wasn't perfect, not even close. But she didn't walk away. As the last notes faded into the air, she whispered to herself, almost like a promise she hadn't fully accepted yet, "I'll keep trying." She didn't know how she would master the piece. She didn't know how long it would take. She didn't know if she would even succeed. But she knew one thing: she wouldn't let fear decide for her that night. She placed the sheet music neatly on her desk before going to bed. She looked at it one more time, feeling both nervous and strangely hopeful. Tomorrow would be another day. Another chance to try again. And even if she didn't believe it yet, something inside her whispered that this challenge might be the beginning of something bigger than she imagined. The next morning felt heavier than usual. She woke up earlier than she needed to, not because she was excited, but because the peace had followed her into her dreams. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the long streams of notes, the fast jumps, the difficult patterns that seemed to stare back at her like a challenge she didn't ask for. She sat on the edge of her bed for a moment, rubbing her eyes and trying to push away the sleepy fog. The sunlight coming from the window was gentle, but it didn't help much. Her mind was already somewhere else back at the piano. She walked to the kitchen, where the house was quiet, except for the soft sound of the refrigerator humming. Breakfast didn't feel like breakfast. She tried to eat, but every bite felt like she was forcing herself. She kept thinking about how poorly she had played the piece last night. The more she thought about it, the more nervous she became. But she also knew she couldn't escape it. Running from the challenge would only make it worse. When she got ready for school, she tucked the sheet music into her folder carefully, as if it was something fragile. On the way there, she walked slower than usual. Her shoes tapped lightly on the pavement, the cool morning air brushing her face. She tried to calm her nerves, but her thoughts kept circling around the same thing: what would happen if she couldn't improve? What would the teachers say? What would the class think? When she reached school, the hallway noise hit her instantly. Students talked loudly. Some joked with each other. Others rushed to avoid being late. She walked through the crowd quietly, hoping no one would bring up yesterday's assignment. But things rarely went the way she hoped. As she approached the music room, she heard a few students talking. "Did you see what she got?" One voice whispered. Yeah, that piece is insane. I don't know why they gave it to her, another replied. She paused before entering. She didn't want to hear more. Her hands tightened around the folder. She took a deep breath and stepped into the room, pretending she hadn't heard anything. But inside, the words stayed with her. The students were warming up on the pianos, stretching their fingers, running through scales. She sat at her usual seat and placed her folder on the desk. She tried to keep her face calm, even though her heart wasn single quotes. One of the teachers walked in soon after and called the class to attention. Today, we'll be focusing on understanding your new pieces. Don't worry about perfection. Just start learning the structure, the teacher said. The teacher looked around, making eye contact with each student, but when their gaze passed over her, she felt a small weight settle in her chest. There was no malice in the teacher's expression, but there was expectation. The class began practicing. Some students played confidently, their fingers moving easily across the keys. Others stumbled through the early parts of their pieces, laughing it off. The room was filled with a messy mix of sounds, from beautiful melodies to awkward broken notes. She slowly opened her folder. The sheet looked even more complicated in the bright morning light. Her eyes followed the dense lines of notes. She felt a lump rise in her throat. She waited a little before going to the piano. She wanted to avoid any attention. When the others were focused on their own practice, she finally stood and walked to an empty piano in the corner. The bench felt cold. She adjusted it, placed the sheet on the stand, and stared at the keys. Her hands hovered above them. Sure. She started with the first measure again, slowly, carefully. But her fingers slipped. The rhythm broke. The notes didn't sound anything like how the piece was supposed to feel. She tried again, and again, and again. Each time she made a mistake, she tried to correct it. But the piece didn't give her room to breathe. It felt like she was fighting against it. Her shoulders tensed. Her eyes burned with frustration. She heard someone at the next piano whisper, "Told you it was too hard for her." She pretended not to hear, but her chest ached. After a long hour of practice, the teacher called for a short break. The room buzzed again with conversation. Some students talked about their progress. Others complained about how boring their pieces were. She sat alone at her piano, staring at her sheet. She didn't want to join anyone. She didn't want to explain how the piece felt like a wall she couldn't climb. The teacher noticed her sitting there and approached quietly. "How's it going?" The teacher asked. She swallowed hard. "I'm trying," she whispered. The teacher nodded. "That's all you need to do right now. Trying is the first step. Don't measure yourself by the others. Just move at your own pace." The words were kind, but she still felt the pressure. "Did you choose this piece for a reason?" she asked slowly. The teacher paused for a moment, then smiled calmly. "We chose it because we've seen how much you care about your music. Sometimes caring deeply makes you capable of more than you think." She didn't know how to respond to that. She just nodded. After school, she didn't rush home. She walked slowly, trying to sort through her thoughts. The sky was cloudy, but the light was still enough to make the streets look calm. She passed by small shops, a bakery, a bookstore, families walking their dogs. Everything moved at its own pace, and she wished she could do the same. When she reached her house, she went straight to her room to drop her bag, then to the piano. She didn't give herself time to overthink. She placed the sheet on the stand and sat in front of the keys. This time she didn't start from the beginning. She picked a smaller part of the piece one small section that had confused her earlier. She practiced only those few notes, slowly repeating them until her fingers understood the pattern. It still wasn't easy, but it didn't feel impossible anymore. She moved to the next small section. Again, slowly, carefully, the minutes turned into hours. The sun shifted, and the room grew dim. She didn't notice until she missed a note because she couldn't see the page clearly. When she checked the time, she was surprised by how fast the day had passed. She took a break and stretched her fingers. They ached. But it was the kind of ache that made her feel like she had done something meaningful. She tried the first page again. It still had mistakes, but it didn't sound as broken as yesterday. She could hear small pieces of the real music trying to form. She played the same lines over and over, and with each repetition, her hands grew more confident. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress. She practiced until she couldn't play anymore. Her fingers felt stiff, and her eyes were tired. She closed the piano and leaned back in her chair, feeling a quiet warmth inside her. She hadn't mastered anything yet, but she had moved forward. Later that night, she sat on her bed and looked at the ceiling, thinking about how the day had gone. The comments from her classmates still hurt. The pressure still sat heavily on her shoulders. But somewhere beneath all of that, she felt a spark. Small but growing hope. Maybe she could do this. Maybe she just needed more time before she slept. She whispered to herself, one step at a time. It wasn't a promise of success. It wasn't a declaration of confidence, but it was something real, something she could hold on to. And as she drifted off to sleep, she didn't see the peace as a monster waiting to defeat her. She saw it as a mountain, a difficult one, a steep one, but a mountain that could be climbed slowly, with patience, and with the belief that every small step still counted. Tomorrow, she knew, she would try again, and the day after that, and the day after that, because even though she still doubted her ability, she wasn't ready to give up. Not yet. The next few days slipped into a quiet routine that felt both exhausting and strangely comforting. Every morning, she woke up before the rest of the house, pulled on a sweater, and walked straight to the piano. The air was cool, and the keys felt cold against her fingertips. But that didn't stop her. She would start with simple warm-ups, letting her fingers loosen one by one, then move slowly into the small sections of the piece she had been practicing the night before. She didn't rush. She didn't try to impress anyone. She just kept going. Some mornings, she felt tired, and the notes blurred together like a messy tangle. On other mornings, she felt clear and focused, and the music made sense in a way it hadn't before. But no matter how she felt, she practiced. School became something she moved through quietly. The noise of the hallways didn't bother her much anymore because her mind was somewhere else. Even when students made small comments about her assignment, she didn't react as much. The worry was still there, but it didn't cut as deeply. She was too busy working in the music room. She continued her routine, while other students talked, laughed, or complained about their simpler pieces. She went straight to the piano at the far corner. She practiced the same lines slowly, again and again, till they started to feel like familiar paths rather than confusing puzzles. At first, the progress was almost invisible. She would play something a little smoother one day, only to make new mistakes the next. But slowly, the small improvements began to gather into something noticeable. Her fingers no longer froze at the tricky jumps. Her hands didn't tense as much. The fast notes still challenged her, but she could get through them without stopping completely. One afternoon, as she was practicing a fast run, she suddenly noticed that her fingers moved without the usual hesitation. The notes flowed in the right order, clean and clear. She finished the line and sat back, surprised. Did she really just play that? She tried again, and again. Each time it felt a little more natural, like her hands were finally listening to her. It wasn't perfection, but it was something she had never been able to do before. She felt a warm rush of relief spread through her chest, loosening a weight she didn't even realize she had been carrying. During class, the teachers started paying more attention to her. She could feel them watching quietly whenever she practiced, though they didn't say much. Their expressions were thoughtful, not critical. It made her feel slightly nervous, but also strangely supported. One day, after class ended, one of the teachers approached her as she packed up. "You're improving," the teacher said simply. She blinked, surprised. "I am." The teacher nodded. "Yes, you're starting to bring out the shape of the music. Keep going." It wasn't a long compliment, but it meant more than the teacher probably realized. She walked out of the classroom feeling lighter, almost like her steps lifted off the floor. That afternoon at home, she went straight to the piano as usual. Her fingers felt tired from a long day, but she still sat down and opened the sheet music. She practiced the same small parts, then added new sections, when she felt confident enough. She didn't push herself too far at once. She was learning to understand her limits and slowly expand them. Her family noticed the change in her routine. They didn't comment much, but they watched her pass through the house quietly each day, always heading to the piano with the same determined expression. Some evenings, they would pause in the hallway to listen to her practice. At first, it was all broken notes and stops, but soon the sound changed. The music grew smoother, clearer, and more expressive. Late one night, after nearly 2 hours of practicing, she sat back and rubbed her eyes. She was tired, but she didn't feel defeated. In fact, she felt encouraged. She stood up and stretched, then turned off the light before heading to bed. As she lay on her mattress, she replayed the music in her head. She could almost hear how the finished piece might sound. It gave her a sense of hope she hadn't felt before. The next morning at school, something unusual happened. When she walked into the music room, a few students paused and looked at her. Their expressions weren't mocking or dismissive this time. Instead, there was a hint of curiosity. "Hey, you're really practicing that piece, huh?" one of them said. She nodded, unsure what to say. "I heard you yesterday," another student added. "It actually sounded kind of good." Comment wasn't said with sarcasm. It was genuine. It caught her off guard so much that all she could do was look down shyly and whisper, "Thanks." She walked to her usual piano and sat down. Her hands trembled a bit, not because of fear, but because something inside her felt different. Something like quiet pride. When she started playing, her fingers moved more confidently. She didn't hide her sound or play softly out of self-consciousness. She played at a normal volume, letting the notes fill the space around her. She still made mistakes, but each mistake taught her something. She was starting to understand the piece, not just the notes, but the feeling behind them. The rises and falls, the gentle parts, the intense parts, the emotions hidden between the keys. It was like learning a language she had always admired but never truly spoken. As the days turned into a week, her routine became something she relied on. Wake up, practice. School, practice. Home, practice. It wasn't forced, it was something she chose, something that became a part of her day. She noticed the way her fingers had changed. The strength in them, the flexibility. She noticed the way her ears had changed too. She could hear mistakes more clearly now. She could also hear improvements. One afternoon, as the teacher walked around the room listening to each student, they stopped beside her piano. She tensed, but kept playing. The teacher stood there quietly, arms crossed, eyes focused on her hands. When she finished the section she was working on, she looked up carefully. "That's much better," the teacher said. "You're beginning to understand the phrasing. Keep shaping the lines like that." She nodded, feeling warmth bloom in her chest. Compliments from that teacher were rare, and she cherished every word. Later that day, she practiced at home with a different kind of energy. Not desperate, not panicked-focused. Calm, determined. She broke down a difficult page into 3 parts and practiced each one slowly. When she made progress, she allowed herself a tiny smile. When she struggled, she didn't grow frustrated. She just tried again. That evening, after nearly 3 hours at the piano, she managed to play a full section without stopping. The notes were smooth, the timing was right, and the emotion was there. She finished the last measure, sat back, stared at her hands. She had never played it that well before. She felt a quiet thrill in her chest. Like a small spark lighting up, she whispered to herself, "I'm getting closer." She got ready for bed. She thought about how far she had come. 2 weeks earlier, she had been terrified of the piece. Now she was shaping parts of it with confidence. She still had a long way to go, many more pages, many more challenges, but for the first time, she believed she could actually reach the end. At school the next day, the teachers announced that they would soon begin individual practice checks for the recital pieces. Some students sighed dramatically, while others seemed excited. She felt nervous, but not the kind of fear that made her want to hide. It was the kind of nervousness that made her want to prepare even more. That afternoon, she practiced harder. She didn't force herself beyond exhaustion, but she pushed herself a little further each time. She practiced sections she had avoided before, sections that scared her. She slowed them down, repeated them patiently, and little by little, they began to take shape. Her body grew tired, but her spirit felt stronger than it had in a long time. When she finally closed the piano for the night, she sat in the quiet room, breathing deeply. She felt grateful for the progress, for the growing strength in her fingers. For the discipline she had built. She didn't feel like a master. Not yet, but she felt like someone becoming better before she slept. She looked at the sheet music spread out on her desk. The notes no longer looked like frightening shapes. They looked like a journey she had already begun. She whispered softly, "Tomorrow will be better." She believed it, because somewhere deep inside her, a certainty was taking root. This difficult piece, the one that once felt impossible, was slowly becoming part of her hands, her heart, and her story. She just had to keep going. One practice session at a time, the days that followed felt like a slow walk through a space where every sound echoed a little louder, and every moment stayed on the surface longer than usual. There was no rush anywhere. Even the mornings felt softer. But inside, he could sense something shifting, like a small light trying to grow brighter, even when he wasn't sure if he was ready for it. He woke up early most days. Not because he had to, but because his mind no longer let him sleep as long as before. There were thoughts that poked him awake, gentle but persistent, urging him to look at the world with new eyes. Sometimes he stayed in bed for a few minutes, just watching the ceiling and listening to the quietness of the room, as if it carried some kind of message. The house was peaceful during those moments. He heard the familiar sounds outside, the distant hum of early traffic. A bird calling from somewhere on the roof, the soft rustle of leaves, and the slight morning wind. These sounds had always been there, but for the first time in a long while he actually noticed them. It made him feel grounded in a strange, calming way. He got up slowly and moved to the kitchen. The smell of tea filled the air as he stood near the stove, waiting for the water to boil. That simple moment became something he started to look forward to every morning. The warmth of the cup in his hands felt reassuring, as if it reminded him that life still had small comforts worth holding on to. After breakfast, he often stepped outside for a short walk. He didn't go far, just around the lane, past a couple of houses, and sometimes a little further toward the small ground near the corner. The walks were quiet, but they helped clear the fog in his mind. He felt each step slightly lighten the weight inside him. He noticed more things during those walks too. The way the sun rose slowly behind the buildings, giving everything a soft, golden color. The way a shopkeeper arranged his goods early in the morning, humming softly to himself. The way a stray cat stretched lazily under a parked car. All small moments, yet somehow they made him feel connected to the day ahead. In the afternoons, he spent time on small tasks. He didn't pressure himself to be perfect or fast. He simply did what he could. Sometimes he cleaned up corners of the house he had ignored for months. Other times he read a few chapters of a book he had left unfinished long ago. He even tried cooking simple meals, something he avoided before because he always felt too busy or too tired. Every task felt like a step toward finding a bit of balance again. Even though none of those things were big achievements, they helped him feel a sense of control he thought he had lost. Some evenings, he sat on the rooftop to watch the colors of the sky change. There was something about sunsets that made him reflect, but not in a heavy way. Instead, they created a sense of calm, gentle reminder that even the day itself softened before ending. While the world outside continued to move fast, his own pace slowed down. He started to understand that it was okay not to rush. It was okay to take things one small step at a time. For the first time, he didn't feel guilty for not forcing himself to speed up. He allowed himself to breathe. There were moments when he still felt unsure. Moments when questions came up. Questions about the future, about the people around him, about the choices he had made. But instead of hiding from those feelings, he let them sit beside him. He didn't judge himself for having them. He simply acknowledged them and tried to listen. One evening, a friend called to check on him. Their conversation wasn't long or deep. They talked about everyday things, whether routines, small memories. But even that small exchange reminded him that he wasn't alone. Someone had thought about him. Someone had cared enough to ask how he was doing. It made him smile in a warm, quiet way. In moments like that, he realized how much he had isolated himself before. He remembered how he used to avoid conversations because he felt he had nothing good to say. But now, even a short call felt like something meaningful. It wasn't the length of the conversation that mattered. It was simply the connection. Another day, he helped an elderly neighbor carry some groceries up the stairs. It wasn't planned. He had simply seen her struggle and stepped forward. She thanked him with a warm smile, and that small act of kindness made him feel lighter the rest of the day. It reminded him that helping others didn't require grand actions. Sometimes the smallest gestures carried the biggest meaning. Slowly, he became more aware of how his actions shaped the way he felt. Whenever he did something kind, he felt calmer. Whenever he took care of himself, even in a simple way, he felt stronger. Whenever he allowed himself to pause, he felt clearer. He still had days when he felt tired, days when old feelings tried to pull him back. But now he had tools to deal with them. He understood that healing wasn't a straight line. It was a slow process with ups and downs, and that was okay. He often thought about the road ahead. He knew he couldn't predict everything or control every outcome, but he also knew he wasn't the same person he had been a few weeks earlier. Something inside him had shifted, softened, opened. He began writing small thoughts in a notebook. Not long paragraphs, just a few lines each day. Sometimes it was something he noticed during his walk. Sometimes it was a feeling he wanted to understand. Sometimes it was just a reminder to himself like, take it slow, or you are doing better than you think. Those small notes became something he looked forward to. They helped him see his progress. They helped him appreciate the small victories he never used to notice. He also learned to enjoy silence. Earlier, silence felt heavy, like something that reminded him of worries. But now, silence became a friend. It gave him space to breathe and think without feeling. Pressured, there was one night when he sat on the rooftop longer than usual. The sky was clear, with only a few clouds drifting slowly. The air was cool. He felt a sense of peace he hadn't felt in months. For the first time in a long while, he felt hopeful, not in a big dramatic way, but in a gentle, believable way. He realized that life didn't need to be perfect for him to feel okay. He didn't need everything figured out. He just needed to keep moving forward at his own pace, one step at a time, and he was finally learning how to do that. Even though he didn't know what the next part of his story would look like, he felt ready for it. Not because everything was easy now, but because he trusted himself more. He trusted the quiet strength he had, slowly built inside. The next chapter of his life wasn't about running from pain or hiding from problems. It was about growing in small, steady ways. It was about understanding himself better. It was about choosing peace over pressure, and as he sat under the soft night sky, he realized he had already begun that journey, without even noticing. The morning of the final performance arrived in a way that felt different. Even before the sun had fully risen, the room was still dim, but she was already awake, sitting quietly at the edge of her bed. She wasn't nervous, not in the way people usually described. It was more like a steady energy inside her, warm and calm, as if her heart already knew what needed to be done. She took a slow breath, letting the cool air settle in her chest. There was no rush. She allowed herself a few minutes to simply sit, listening to the soft silence of the early hours. It felt like the world outside had paused, giving her a gentle moment to gather her thoughts. When she finally stood up, it was with a quiet purpose. She didn't check her phone or hurry through her routine. She moved slowly, brushing her hair, washing her face, preparing herself for a day she had imagined so many times, but never in this exact way. She ate a small breakfast, though she barely tasted it. Her mind drifted toward the music waiting for her. Each note, each shift, each breath in the piece now lived inside her. She no longer needed to look at the sheets. The music had become part of her, as natural as breathing. She left the house earlier than usual. The air outside was cool, fresher than she expected. As she walked, She noticed small things she often overlooked: the way the leaves sounded in the morning wind, the faint smell of fresh bread coming from a nearby bakery, the soft glow of sunlight rising behind the rooftops. Everything felt calmer, as if the world itself wanted to wish her well. When she reached the music hall, it looked larger than usual, almost grand. The wide glass doors reflected the early morning sky. She paused for a moment before entering, taking a slow breath. She let her hand rest lightly on the metal handle, feeling the cold surface, then pushed the door open. Inside, the hall was already buzzing with small movements, teachers walking around, students setting up their instruments, a few parents speaking quietly near the back, but the noise didn't distract her. Instead, it all blended into a soft background, like gentle static. Her teacher approached with a warm smile, but with a softness in the eyes that held something more: pride, admiration, maybe a hint of surprise. "You're early," the teacher said in a friendly tone. She simply nodded. Words felt unnecessary. The teacher guided her toward the backstage area, reminding her of the schedule and timing, but she already knew everything. Still, she listened politely, giving small nods as they walked. When she stepped into the backstage room, she saw a couple of students already warming up. Some were practicing scales, others flipping nervously through pages of sheet music, but she didn't rush to do the same. Instead, she set her bag down and took a seat in the corner. Closing her eyes in her mind, she played the first few lines of the assignment. Not with anxiety, but with familiarity. Each sound had lived in her thoughts for so many weeks that it felt as though the piano keys were already beneath her fingertips. Minutes passed quietly. Finally, her name was called. She stood up slowly, smoothed the front of her shirt, and walked toward the stage door. The hallway seemed longer than usual, but her steps were steady. A hint of warm light spilled through the doorway leading to the stage. When she stepped out, the hall looked even bigger from the stage than it did from the entrance. Rows of seats stretched out, filled with students, teachers, and guests. There was a gentle murmur in the air that fell silent as soon as they realized she had arrived. She walked calmly to the piano. It stood in the center of the stage, polished, waiting. She gently ran her fingers along its surface, feeling the cool wood. Before slowly taking her seat, she adjusted the bench, placed her hands lightly on her lap, and looked at the keys. They dropped into silence with her, as if holding their breath. When she finally lifted her hands and placed them over the keyboard, something eased inside her. All the practice, all the frustration, all the long nights suddenly felt worth it. She began. The first note came like a soft whisper, but it carried through the hall with clarity. The next notes followed with a smooth flow, rising and falling in perfect rhythm. Her fingers moved with confidence, gliding from one corner of the keyboard to the other, shaping each sound with a gentle precision. She didn't rush. She didn't push. She simply let the music guide her. The audience sat completely still. No one shifted. No one whispered. All eyes were on her. Her teacher, standing near the corner of the stage, watched with a look that grew more emotional with each passing moment. The assignment had been challenging, far more challenging than anything given before, but she played it like it belonged to her. Halfway through the piece, the melody grew deeper, as if telling a story. Her fingers slowed in certain moments, giving the music time to breathe. Then they moved again, stronger, clearer, almost glowing with emotion. And then came the part that many struggled with, the fast run of notes that climbed and dipped like a sudden gust of wind. It was the section every teacher expected to be the hardest. She didn't hesitate. Her hands flew over the keys. Not wildly, but with a practiced grace that made the notes sound like flowing water. Even she felt surprised by how steady her fingers remained, but she stayed focused. She stayed inside the music, the hall filled with a sound that was both powerful and soft. Intense, yet controlled, a balance many players twice her age struggled to master. When the final part approached, she allowed herself to breathe deeply, guiding the melody gently toward its end. Her fingers slowed naturally, each note landing softly until the very last one hung in the air like a fading light. And then, silence. For a few seconds, no one moved. Then the applause rose, first softly, then growing louder, filling the hall. Some students clapped with wide eyes. A few teachers exchanged glances of disbelief. Her teacher stood the tallest, clapping with a kind of pride that made their eyes shine. She didn't smile immediately. She simply lowered her hands from the keys and looked at the piano for a moment, letting the applause wash over her. Only then did her face soften into a quiet, gentle smile. She stood, bowed politely, and walked off the stage. Backstage, her teacher approached in a way that seemed almost unsteady, as though still processing what had happened. "That was remarkable," the teacher whispered, not wanting to break the quiet magic still lingering around her. She didn't know what to say, so she just nodded again, smiling shyly. They didn't need more words. Later, she stepped outside the hall. The sun had risen higher, warming the ground. The day felt brighter, but not because of the weather. Something inside her felt bigger, steadier, clearer. She didn't think of herself as a master, even though others might call her that after today. She simply thought of herself as someone who loved the piano enough to give it her whole heart. She walked home with a calm mind, feeling the music continue to play softly inside her. Each step felt light, as if the world had opened a little more. She knew this wasn't the end. This was the beginning of a new path when she was ready to walk. Slowly, steadily, note by note, and though she didn't say it aloud, she knew one thing with certainty. She had made her teachers proud, but more importantly, she had made herself proud. She had turned the hardest assignment into something beautiful, and that beauty would stay with her for a long, long time.